Kirakoto ko Jonah Duckles Tokoinga Tanakoto. So I'm here to talk about the many talents of open source for project leaders. I've been curating a couple of community calls for the Zuckerberg initiative, and that's what I'm going to talk about. My organization is organizational mycology. People say, oh, you do mushrooms. We don't really do mushrooms, but we do love mushrooms, and we think mushrooms are really neat, and we think mushrooms are a really neat inspiration for how to think about diversity, organizations, structures, and things like that. So a little background, this work was led by my team members, Dr. Dan Schaller, Dr. Beth Duckles, and myself. We're kind of the team that has done this. This is all work that we've done in the context of the Zuckerberg's essential open source software ecosystem. And this is around community calls that we did that were made available to the 190 projects that EOSS has funded over the years to, that are all open source projects that are contributing lots of projects you probably use if you're doing e-research, lots of different projects that are out there. So we run these community calls and we ask and we convene conversations. And so I'm going to share with you today a couple of those resources that you can go and look at it on your own and go in depth into one resource. So there's a couple of these about managing an open source project, 10 simple rules for leadership, and measuring and assessing open source projects. We're releasing 6 more this year as we kind of go forward as well. What this is really about is cat herding. So when we ran this meeting at first, we said this is about cat herding. So cats are notoriously hard to herd. They don't like to stay herded together. Academics are about as difficult, in my experience, to herd as cats. So when you're thinking about leading a project full of people that you don't necessarily have formal authority over, how do you eat that elephant? So how do you start thinking about this you have a big open source project, it doesn't have to be an open source software project, it could be an open science project. You have a big initiative with lots of people with many different perspectives. What do you do to try and pull those people together? That's what we'll talk about here. So this is inspired by how projects are often multi-organizational. People come from different jobs, different perspectives. They have different management structures that they live underneath. Things like excessive bureaucracy and red tape don't necessarily motivate or get people to do things in these kind of organizations. So these are 10 tips that came out of a community conversation with those people. So one thing you can do to start is establish and over-communicate the project's mission and vision. And we often think, oh, we told people what our mission and vision is. They can just go find it on the website. No, you have to constantly tell people that this is kind of what we're here for, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish. You can lead by example, doing the technical work sometimes when a new project comes together. Working alongside your community is often very noticed. So being a technical contributor on a technical project, being an organizational contributor on an organizational project, finding those ways. Finding ways that you can kind of support others that crave leadership and responsibility as well can be useful. And you don't start with natural authority. You kind of cultivate authority through this kind of mutual sharing of yourselves with each other and what the possibilities are collectively together. You can align incentives for contribution and participation, so consider what the real incentives are for people who contribute. Getting situations where you have win-win-wins go better than just a win-win, so finding ways that you have these kind of virtuous cycles can be very useful. And that can often also prevent other people from kind of running off with resources. Creating agency and opportunity for your community members. So sometimes this is thought about in the context of how you find meaningful work for what they're working on, actively kind of trying to remove barriers for contribution and invite people into your project. So if that's a software project, that might mean getting your documentation in order. If that's an organizational project, it might be how do you invite people to make their first contribution in your organization? How do you welcome them? How do you create the spaces for people in those? Then every one of these people who's coming to your thing is coming from other organizational cultures. So you have to have a bit of intention about the group that you're building and what its culture is and what you want that culture to be. So if you're having online meetings, that's one thing. If you're having conversations in GitHub issues or you're having conversations in Slack or things, being intentional about what your group's culture is, what your group's norms are, and what you'd like them to be, and having open conversations around that is definitely important. So as you're building these organizations that live apart from other people's organizations, people come to them for all kinds of various different reasons. Sometimes it's about solving a problem that they have inside of their own organization. Sometimes it's finding purpose outside of the organization that they don't necessarily have purpose in, or they're not finding their purpose in. So really focusing on ways in which you create psychological safety for people, know what you don't want in your group's dynamics, and have conversations about what you're trying to create in terms of how that group works together. And don't underestimate the people you already have. Ask for skills in-house when you're kind of looking for things to grow. Work to kind of empower others in the group. Create pathways for community members that they can advance into leadership roles. Start kind of understanding your contributors and how what their goals are in terms of their own career advancement, their own personal advancement in the context of the work that you're doing. Encourage people to step up and do more than they might even know that they can do. Listen and adapt to develop contributor motivation. So start where people already are. Try and understand what they came to. If it's a particular scientific package where it's helping them solve a scientific problem, they started from that premise. If it's a more professional development kind of organization, there's different ways that you can kind of structure the organization to adapt to people's contributions. And what does the organization need and want out of contributions? So figure out how to make it easy as well. So what are the barriers? What's stopping people from getting involved? Go ask people who are users who maybe aren't contributors. Try and understand the kind of archetypes of contributors that you might have and the different ways that you can craft and create opportunities for them. Expect and prepare for community turnover. So kind of working to cultivate an environment that seeks to prevent contributor burnout is super important. This happens far too often in projects. We do a lot of interviews in our work with big open science organizations, and we actively go to try and talk to people who are no longer contributing to try and understand the ways in which, why they're not contributing anymore. And often it comes down to how the organization is structured around how it's supportive or not supportive. People might leave, welcome them when they come back, right? It's always great to not create kind of dynamics where it's like, oh, you're not contributing anymore. Like, people have lives get in the way a lot. Open science projects, you never know what's going to get in the way, open source projects of someone. So trying to be gracious about that is great. So these 10 were developed by a panel discussion for about an hour. Not a panel discussion, but just an open discussion of about 10 people who showed up to a call to have a conversation, plus a kind of review process afterwards. So we're doing that kind of process to collect these kinds of bits of wisdom to help people out in open source and open science. We have these other resources. Some of them are forthcoming. We have one on software code review that was just finished off. It's going through our kind of review process. We have one that's going to be combined financial models and sustainability. That's going to be a bit of resources around those kinds of things. So what we're really trying to do is, in the context of EOSS, help open source projects that have been funded by EOSS, but also create resources that are out there in the world that help people in open source in general. And in the context of that, we as an organization, organizational mycology, are trying to create a thing that we're calling Foundations of Open Science Leadership, where this is the mini MBA program nobody has ever had, which is, so you want to step into the this kind of open science space, and you want to create an organization. You see opportunities around your own research project, your own software project that might be useful. So if you're interested in that, We have an expression of interest forum. We're trying to build a bit of a case for it to try and get some funding for it. If we can't get funding for it, we're going to try and do it with people's professional development funding and a bit of offering scholarships and things on a need basis to people. So have a look at that. That'll get you on an email list if you're interested in that. Please share that with anyone who you might know who is in a project who would benefit from that kind of thing. On Thursday at 2 p.m., Richard Littauer and I will be continuing a conversation we did last year, which is the case for open source in Aotearoa, asking ourselves what's kind of stopping different academics and organizations and research institutions in New Zealand from creating more open source projects and how we can support and cultivate more of that. And with that, that's me.